The Florida Gators have already fired their head coach. Could Kentucky join them next?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to a crossover edition of Locked On Gators and Locked On Kentucky. I am Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators, joined by Lance Dawe of Locked On Kentucky. And Florida Gators fans, you got to experience, Locked On Kentucky, and earlier this week, Locked On Wildcats. How about that? Let's also be real. Locked On Kentucky should be the Locked On Wildcats show. I'm just going to throw my opinion out there. That's it. That's just how I feel about it. Today's episode of Locked On Gators and Locked On Kentucky is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And Lance, I have been given the good fortune of a coaching search going on. I'm torn on if I want the same for you or not. I will say that, but I will also say that Kentucky beat Auburn last week and forced a coach to be fired. Can Florida beat Kentucky and force the same, or has Kentucky fallen into what Florida did last year of close games, a win here and there? That's good enough.
That's the question right now that I think the fan base is asking is, okay, you went on the road, you beat one of the worst teams in the SEC. What exactly does that do now for Stoops' job security when it felt like most signs were pointing towards a firing either at the end of the season or whenever he screwed up at some point here towards the end of the schedule? So that is the question. Obviously, you see Stoops really emotional following the Auburn game, Mitch Barnhart on the sideline, and Jordan-Hare as well. I think it's pretty clear this administration, or at least Barnhart, isn't necessarily all in gung-ho about firing a guy that has been one of the best coaches in program history, if not the best. There has been a guy named Bear that's a part of this history here in Lexington. But still, I don't necessarily know if Barnhart wants to, but it feels like the majority of, if not a large majority, a very large majority of the fan base wants this thing to end. In fact, I think a lot of people would point back to a couple of years ago, whenever in the dead of night, he almost left for Texas A&M. The only reason he came back is because Texas A&M freaked out whenever they realized, hey, this is the decision that we're about to make. Let's back out of this. And he was going to leave. And so now some Kentucky fans are a little upset that he's still here after he tried to depart. And now that we are not as good as we used to be, I think a lot of fans are kind of tired of where the program is. The recruiting's not getting better. The offense is getting worse. We're not seeing any changes, any real development over these last two and a half seasons. So I think a lot of people want the plug pulled. And I think the interesting thing here is, Brandon, as far as this weekend's game goes against Florida, is how, depending on how the contest goes, whether or not those conversations that were happening before the Auburn game kind of start to rekindle. I mean, at least as seriously as they were being had before the Wildcats won in Jordan-Hare. So this is a very interesting game here this weekend for Kentucky. Obviously, things could get pretty ugly as far as how the game is played out on the field with both teams. But depending on whether or not Kentucky gets blown out, I think you might see the Wildcats start to move back in that direction. At least that's what I think a large majority of the fan base wants.
It's very interesting to me always how we deal with this coach should be fired without a doubt. No doubt about that one at all that stuff. And then it's just but they won a game against a great defense, but absolutely horrendous offense, but they won a game. And so that changes entirely how things shape out. And that's just, that's always been odd to me. But I do think that you mentioned something very interesting, which is this game could get ugly on the field. Why did you say that it's a possibility? This game, this is going to be ugly. We know what Florida's offense has looked like. We know what Kentucky, has looked like for years at this point. They just want to grit things out. I've said the saying many times before of never argue with an idiot, because they drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience. And that's how Kentucky plays football. And so I expect this game to be ugly and messy at this point, and I hate it. I do think that Kroger Field also might play a factor in it. I feel like whenever Florida goes there, for some reason, it's always a night game. Don't know why. Would love to play you guys during the day. but I feel like it's always a night game. And for some reason, like I think back to Dan Mullen's, I think, final year in Gainesville. They went to Kentucky, and Florida had what felt like a billion penalties with this crowd just rocking. And so I fully expect this to be just a horrible game that's not good football. No one's going to leave from it with a big smile on their face unless it's Kentucky fans with a new head coach, hopefully incoming at this point.
Yeah, this one I think has the ability to get really nasty just because of the nature of how Kentucky likes to play the game, how they like to play this game specifically against Florida. And then again, just kind of like the mental aspect of this as to where, this team is, where the players are at mentally at this point at 3-5 with basically no hope of making a bowl game. And you're probably going to see a coach out the door, depending on how things go. Right now you're just kind of, are you just playing for each other at this point? And how much does that matter? How much does that impact you mentally if you're a player on this roster with significant playing time? I'm not quite sure. So I think this could get ugly just in terms of stylistically how Kentucky might approach this, and then also just mentally, are they all the way there after beating Auburn? Like, is this where you kind of rally now and you're able to come back home? You're able to beat a team without a head coach, and then you kind of roll into Tennessee Tech saying, okay, we can be 5-5 heading into our final two. We get one of those, we're bowling and Stoops is back next season. I don't know where this team is at mentally, but I will go ahead and tell you, like you just said, this is going to be a kind of grinded out, nasty type game, I think, between these two teams, just because of how Kentucky's going to try and slow this game down, play with as slow of a pace as possible. See if they can end every drive with a field goal or nothing. It feels like every time they get possession, this could get really, really ugly, Brandon. So it's mental, it's personnel wise, it's the situation. This is a nasty game. Honestly, if you wanted to, Brandon, we could leave this open. We could talk about Florida basketball for the next 20 minutes if you'd like. We could dive into. Well, you've already got enough Wildcats already this weekend with that. So, but yeah, this could get nasty for sure.
Yeah, a little bit too many Wildcats I've dealt with already. And also, I don't want to talk about Denzel Aberdeen. I know it's really sensitive for him. He had a coach that didn't believe in him, and that's why he's left. Sure, he was on the court shooting potentially national championship winning free throws. Of course, they ended up being that, but at the time he was shooting them, he didn't know that. But really interesting that he just didn't have a coach that believed in him enough, although he was shooting free throws in the national championship to go ahead and win it all. Very, very interesting there. But I do find it also interesting just how these two teams are kind of viewed right now in football. I feel like everyone looks at Kentucky and they go, like, first off, gross. No one likes Kentucky's style of football. Just nobody. I don't even think Stoops likes it. He's just like, this is what we got to do. But both teams here are 3-5. Florida has already fired their coach. Kentucky should fire their coach. I don't know if I want them to, but they should fire their coach. And both teams are looking with, well, if Kentucky can sneak a win this weekend, and then you have Tennessee Tech, and then you can go ahead and sneak into a bowl game. Florida, we're looking at this and saying, all right, well, you should beat Kentucky. You should beat Florida State, I think, later in the year. I think that they've just fallen off horrendously after that first month of the season, which was always going to be the thing, by the way, with Florida State. Was always, I didn't think they had the depth to hang for a full season. And then you go, all right, well, Mississippi, Tennessee, can we sneak one out? So both teams are 3-5 right now. Both teams are like, we just got to sneak a little bit and get into a bowl game, when realistically, not super likely. I don't think that anybody's looking at these teams saying, yeah, like bowl game is what should happen. But this weekend, we've got this matchup, and we'll talk about what that matchup is going to look like outside of the obvious, hideous, terrible, no good, very bad football that you're going to see when we get back with Locked On Gators and Locked On Kentucky. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting on projects, which, by the way, going to be a lot of punts in this game, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered, which I don't know if any quarterback's blind side is going to be covered in this game either. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators and Locked On Kentucky your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. I am Brandon Olsen with Locked On Gators, joined by Lance Dawe of Locked On Kentucky. And Lance, I think that we're both expecting ugly football. I think that we've both made that abundantly clear, that Kentucky likes to play that style of football. I don't think Florida likes to play that style. I think that especially under Billy Gonzalez, they want to spread things out. They want to find more success, but due to DJ Lagway's struggles this year and random games where the offensive line decides they don't know how to pass block anybody, Florida's been forced to play just ugly football. I do think that's a thing that worries me with this game is that like, I look at these teams and I go, all right, Florida's clearly the better football team here, in my opinion. More talented roster. I think they've got a great roster. Coaching has failed them most of the way. But Kentucky wants to play messy. Florida doesn't want to play messy and has been forced to do that. That worries me when I think about Florida's chances in this game. And I think Florida should win this game, but I don't think it's as clean cut as it should be, especially after Kentucky just beat an Auburn team. Bad offense, fantastic defense, like how Florida's played most of this year. And Kentucky went to the wire with Texas, which still a talented team. They seem like they've put it together. Only took them 8 weeks. But I think that this game is a lot closer than a lot of people are giving them credit for, just because stylistically, I think it favors Kentucky right now.
Yeah, again, like we were talking about just a little bit ago, the fact that it's going to be at Kroger Field, Kentucky coming off of the win, I guess the question of where Kentucky's at mentally, what sort of momentum do you bring in? And then also you touched on it for a second there. DJ Lagway has not had the season that a lot of fans would have expected him to. Obviously, I think a good chunk of that has to do with the development and the coaching surrounding him. But I mean, he's still here, former 5-star, has shown a ton of flashes. When you look at where Kentucky's at right now, defensively, obviously holding Auburn to 10 points, as talented as maybe some of the personnel is on that roster, still not getting it done because of coaching. Do you look at this Florida game and go, okay, well, we also have the talent on offense to kind of get things done against Kentucky, who statistically is still one of the worst defenses in the SEC? And do you kind of look at it different than Auburn, saying, okay, well, we might not have the head coach, but at least we have some more competency on that side of the football to kind of get somebody like Lagway going?
Yeah, I hope so. I really do. Like we had last week, Ryan O'Hara was the play caller for the first time, which is wild to me that his last play calling experience was with Alabama A&M in 2016. So very different level of football, and obviously a very long time ago. But I do think that for the most part, the offense looked not good because they still only scored 20 against against Georgia, which no pass rush and only being able to score 20 is not great. But DJ Lagway got his completion percentage more respectable in that game after a few bad stretches. Got Trey Wilson moving for the first time since what felt like 2023 as a wide receiver. And last year, DJ Lagway found a ton of success with the deep ball against Kentucky. For me, I look at the injuries also for Florida, where you've got Dallas Wilson banged up and likely missing the rest of the season. Vernell Brown III and Aiden Mizell were both out last week. So even if they're there, it's like no one goes from out to being 100% in 1 week. So even if there is availability there, which at the time of recording, before the availability report is out, so we don't know that at this moment. Even if they are back, they're not going to be 100%. So I just look at it and I go, all right, well, like Florida might need to play this grit, grind, ugly style of football that Kentucky wants to, but also I'm like, all right, well, DJ Lagway had an awesome game last year against Kentucky. It was his, I think still to this point, the most passing yards he's had against a Power 4 opponent. And so I look at that and I go, I think maybe just barely past that with Texas this year, but it's still one of his best performances. And he only completed 7 passes against Kentucky, which is wild. They were just all deep shots. So I just look at this and I'm like, all right, well, Kentucky's offense also just weird. But I think that hopefully with another week of Ryan O'Hara calling plays and Billy Gonzalez as the head coach, you can actually see them take a step forward, because last week, the big selling point for facing Georgia was they had no idea what Ryan O'Hara was going to do as a play caller.
Yeah.
Now you've got still a great defensive minded coach in Mark Stoops, and now you've put out a little bit, at least, of what you want to do offensively under Ryan O'Hara. So I'm very interested to see if those tendencies get broken a little bit, or tough to call them tendencies considering it was one game. But if you, what you put on film, if you can build off of that and how Mark Stoops really approaches that, I think this is going to be a more proven test for a coaching staff this week than any player on Florida's offense.
Talk to me a little bit about, we were talking about this before we hopped on for a second, as far as what Florida is playing for in this game. Obviously, Kentucky, I think that is the question of how fired up they are. I've already said it a few times. But as far as Florida goes, we were discussing before we hopped on that there's actually quite a bit at stake, at least for the players here.
Yeah, we had this conversation last week on Locked On Gators with Hayden Hansen, Florida Gators starting tight end. He's on the show every Wednesday. And last week, we spoke about it. This is your first game after firing Billy Napier. What do you guys play for? How do you stay motivated? And first off, they're still playing. Like Hayden has said it every single time. He's like, look, like we want to finish strong for Billy Napier, even though he got fired. The locker room, many people in the locker room were kind of okay with him getting fired, but wanted him to stick through the remainder of the season. Because they know, it's a business. You got to win football games. If you're not winning football games, and you're going to get fired. But hopefully let him play out the rest of the season. Didn't happen. So they're playing for that. A lot of these guys are playing for NFL draft potential, NFL draft value, which still does matter. You've got guys playing for the next coach, whoever that may be. This is an audition for a lot of guys to say, hey, like Florida Gators fans are always going to go, who do you want to hire? Lane Kiffin. Like that's going to be the name that comes up. These players need to prove themselves to Lane Kiffin, who has proven he's not even willing, but he wants to go into the transfer portal and get new talent and introduce new talent to a roster. So you've kind of got to show enough to say for, again, whether that's Lane, whether that's Eli Drinkwitz, whether that's me and Lance getting the job, like you got to show that you should be maintained and retained on this roster in 2026. And so a lot of guys are playing for that. And realistically, I know this ruffled some feathers when Hayden mentioned it, but some of these guys are playing for the transfer portal. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like some of these guys are going to be pushed to the transfer portal. I know there are players on the roster that I want pushed to the transfer portal. And so some of these guys are going to be pushed to the transfer portal. Some of these guys are going to just make the right business decision in some instances and go, I'm going to go into the portal, keep my availability back. I'm not going to shut the door on Florida, but I'm going to go into the portal, see what happens, see what this new head coach is going to sell me, see what other teams are going to offer me, see what they're going to sell me. Like I know that people automatically go, he hit the portal, he's just chasing money. Then realistically, that's not what it is. There's a lot of guys that do go to the portal for money, but like we've seen guys leave Florida and openly say, I want to win. I want to be used how this guy's going to use me. Like we spoke with Trevor Etienne when he left for Georgia, which still unforgivable move. Not excusing going to Georgia from Florida. That's a cardinal sin. But he went from Florida to Georgia and he was like, yeah, like I want to be a running back on a team that wins. Like that's what I want to do. Princely Umanmielen, he left Florida, went to Ole Miss. And despite what many people say, where it's all about money, a lot of that came down to, I want to be used how they told me they're going to use me.
Yeah.
I still will not say the name, but I had a player leave and tell me, oh yeah, I'm leaving because our strength and conditioning isn't good enough. And our development at my position isn't good enough. That coach isn't here. That strength and conditioning staff member isn't here. This was a couple years ago. Like guys hit the portal for a bunch of different reasons. Right now, even if you're not playing for necessarily the patch, like they've been talking about, like Billy Gonzalez has been talking about, how Hayden has been talking about, yeah, like you're playing for the patch right now. A lot of these guys, they still have things to play for. And I do think that the rule of what used to be, when a coach is fired, you have 30 days to enter the transfer portal. That's no longer a rule. They shifted that. So guys are more inclined to finish out the year. Now you're playing to put out good film. Now you're playing to impress whoever may be looking for a player at your position in the NFL draft or in the transfer portal. That's just the reality of the situation, right? It's not to say that guys are going to leave or that guys want to leave. Some guys are going to leave without wanting to leave. They're going to be pushed out. That's just what football is right now. And I think that despite having a new head coach, there's still a lot to play for on top of a bowl game where younger guys are going to get more opportunities if they make it that far.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, the current state of college football is not what it was even 10 years ago. For the majority of, I think, the roster or the front-facing players of this program at Florida, a lot of these guys, to quote Cardell Jones, didn't come here to play school. They came here to play ball, and a lot of these kids are trying to either make money doing that now or make a living on it for their career. That's what they want to do for the rest of their life. And so if they're not getting the time, if they're not getting the resources, if they're not getting the development, if they're not getting the money that they need now to make that career a reality, I mean, when your coach gets fired, I mean, a lot of things kind of get thrown out the window, I feel like. And so I don't think it's unreasonable at all to look at this and say, hey, look, guys could be playing for the portal. Guys are auditioning for next year. Guys are trying to play for something so that they can prove they still matter to either an SEC roster here in Gainesville or a roster elsewhere. If Jaden Ball wants to come play in the blue and white next year, hey, it'd be really nice if you popped off in this game here.
Nope. He already had 5 touchdowns against you guys last year. He's good. Don't worry about it.
Come join Denzel Aberdeen. We pay our players here. But no, I'm kidding. But yeah, I think that's a completely reasonable thing. And I guess my last question here to you, Brandon, is there a player, like I just mentioned, like a front-facing player that's going to impact this game that has something to prove in this contest, either for this coaching staff or a new coaching staff in Gainesville or possibly, elsewhere? Who's that guy in your mind?
I'm honestly offensively, I'm looking for someone like Trey Wilson, who had a great game last week.
Yeah.
But for the overwhelming majority of this season has been a ghost. Last season was injured, missed most of the season, but he's someone that for years we saw just run behind the line of scrimmage. The first 2 years of his career, he was just a pure gadget guy. I'm looking for him to just try to show something. I don't think he's going to go to the NFL draft after this year, partially because of injuries taking his sophomore season, partially because we're this far out and he hasn't really popped off at all there. And so I look at that and say, Trey Wilson's the guy that I'm looking for and that I want to see have a repeat performance because he might just be a Georgia killer. In 2023, that was his best year as a receiver. This year, that's the only good year he's had as a receiver. So I'd like to see that. When we get back, we'll talk about who's going to win this game by how much. And Lance, I'd like to spin that question back to you when we get back with Locked On Gators and Locked On Kentucky. The NBA is back. College basketball is back and already broke my heart. There's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game or you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. I know that I think it was Tuesday night. Or maybe Monday night, Cooper Flagg started off a little hot, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to ride the hot hand. And then he went completely ghost for a large majority of the rest of the game. So thank you so much, Cooper. Appreciate it, Coop. That's why your team didn't win a national championship last year. Just want to throw that out there. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators or Locked On Kentucky your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free, just in case there's some weirdo that wants to listen to both. I don't know why they would do that, but enjoy the comment section. I am Brandon Olsen of Locked On Gators. This is Lance Dawe of Locked On Kentucky. And Lance, before the break, we spoke about a Florida player that we're looking for to hopefully have a big game, put something to prove out there on film. And so I'm going to spin the question back to you for Kentucky, where hopefully looking for a new coach, at least from your side. Again, like I'm cool if Stoops wants to stay and be a perennial loser. That's fine with me. But on Kentucky side, who are you looking for to impress?
I think that you could go with two players here, both on offense, I think is where you're looking. I'm looking at, obviously, quarterback Cutter Boley. If Stoops is going to ride this thing out, he's going to be back next year. Would really like to see Cutter kind of get things going to end the year. Obviously had a really good performance against Tennessee, had some awful throws against Auburn, and yet still made it out there. Let's start to build up some more consistency in the passing game with him. And then to build off of that, as far as Boley goes, I think another player that you could look at, just start looking at the youth in this receiver room. Harley Gilmore could be a great answer here as far as him playing more consistently. DJ Miller had a great game against Tennessee. Maybe you see him pop back up here. Just finding some youth on this roster that, if Stoops is back, they're probably going to be back as well. Just finding some guys here in this game that could maybe contribute against what I think is a really talented Florida squad. You mentioned something, Brandon, there talking about, FanDuel here. Chat, does anybody want to touch the 3.5 point line on this game? Does anybody even want to touch that with a 10-foot pole? Because I would not even bother looking at that. It scares me.
I'm going to let you know. I'm picking Florida to cover it.
Okay.
Knowing that I'm very possibly going to be quite upset with it, and quite upset with myself. I will say, speaking of FanDuel, I bet Cutter Boley's passing yards against, I think it was Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I bet Cutter Boley's passing yards against Georgia because the line was set at like 118 or something like that. And I was like, I'd be an idiot to not take that in a game where they're going to get blown out, right? Like I would have to do that. But I am going to take Florida to cover that 3.5, just because I think that, again, Kentucky's going to make things ugly and gross and disgusting. But I also think that Kentucky's going to try to run the football consistently, and Florida's done a very good job at containing the run for most of this year. And so I'm looking at it as just Florida's going to settle for field goals and probably score a touchdown or two. And I think Kentucky's going to have probably a touchdown and maybe a couple of field goals. Like, I'm looking at this as a gross game where Florida will hopefully score 21-24. And I think Kentucky finishes in the 10-16 range. And so I don't think this is going to be a blowout at all. I just think that Florida is going to be able to find the end zone once or twice, and that Kentucky won't be able to do that consistently and will hopefully stay out of the red zone entirely.
They're going to have to find, I think I said this before the Auburn game, because I predicted Kentucky to win that. Got a lot of pushback from Auburn fans last week. I don't know if you saw what was going on there as far as
I haven't heard from them at all. Really interesting. I haven't seen them at all in the week. It's really weird.
Nothing at all. I made the grave mistake of saying, I think right now Kentucky's a better program than Auburn is, just because they have been winning more in recent history. And recruiting means nothing if you can't win on the field. Got a lot of flack from Auburn fans. And then Kentucky went to Jordan-Hare Stadium and won. And so,
you can win in Voodoo Land. That matters.
That does matter. You may or may not, even if we are both trying to get rid of our coaches, I think it matters. But I think you make some good points there. Florida, really solid rush defense. Kentucky kind of still has that grounded pound, grinded out mentality. If you're able to kind of get to Kentucky off of the ball here, they're like top 25 in FPS in terms of possession time per game. If you're able to kind of get them off of the ball, maybe do some of that back to them, kind of slow this game down. Once you get into the red zone, convert. Florida has one of the best red zone offenses in the country, actually. Kentucky not so good there, bottom third. Maybe once you get close, you convert, get a couple of touchdowns. And Brandon, I'm not going to lie to you, you put the ball in the end zone twice, that might be enough against this Kentucky team.
Forget the field goals. You do it twice. You do it twice and you're good.
You do it twice and you go ahead and ask if you want to go ahead and call it at that point. No, I think that there's also the opportunity for Kentucky to hit some downfield shots, is what I was actually saying earlier before I cut myself off. That's what they were going to have to try and do against Auburn. They tried to do that. They missed some open receivers, and then Auburn just sort of bailed them out at various spots. They had a really long screen pass go for a touchdown to Kendrick Law, but I don't necessarily know if you can bank on something like that. In this game, Kentucky's going to have to just find something. There's going to have to be some amount of luck that factors into them finding a way to win this game. Because I think it's funny, I'm going to take Kentucky to win this game 17-16. I think Florida will do something awful at the end, like miss a field goal on the final drive or something that could have given them the win. This is not to spite you, Brandon. I just genuinely think that this game is going to be stupid. But I will take the Wildcats to win this one in just a slugfest. I think this is going to be a super ugly game.
Yeah, and for the listeners of Locked On Gators, at least, wondering why I'm not way more confident in this, is because the last time I was really confident going into a Kentucky game was right after they beat Utah in 2022.
Yeah.
And I came in real confident. I came in hot for that crossover. And then Florida lost in the swamp to Kentucky with Will Levis and Anthony Richardson, and they played one of the worst football games of all time. So I refuse to be really confident until Florida gives me a reason to prove that they should be. So for Locked On Gators, I am Brandon Olsen. This is Lance Dawe of Locked On Kentucky. Thank you so much for tuning in to Locked On Gators or Locked On Kentucky and making us your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is going to be nuts.
I'm going to hate it. I'm going to hate my life.
It's going to